tonight is he shows you he's still got it. I think if there is a negative, even though there were a lot of collective positive performances that we laid out in the first segment, we'll continue to get into. If there is a little bit of a negative, it's almost, hey, he had to be that great for the Warriors to ultimately eke one out. Although, again, I felt like they were in control last night. I don't feel like it. Last night doesn't go in the category of close win for me. They won by 8. They were up by 18. Yes, it got down to 5. I don't put that in the Warriors won a close game category.
Yeah, no, I think you're right there. I think that this game was only in question because of the tidal wave that was the Kings last season down the stretch, and I think a little bit of some of the hesitancy from the Warriors and not being able to take care of the basketball, and that is sometimes who they can become. But I think, and maybe I'm just wrong for this, Jay. You can check me, but it's almost like I have come to expect this from, a Stephen Curry who is, 35 going on 36. And I think it was either yesterday or the day before, ESPN's Jay Williams was kind of throwing out the fact of, well, the oldest finals MVP was Kareem Abdul-Jabbar, and he was age 36. And I think the oldest regular season MVP in recent memory has been no older than 28 or 29. But the fact that Curry's continued to play at this level has almost made me numb to the number that is assigned to him, which is his age. Like, I've seen age show from Klay. We've seen age show from Draymond. But Stephen Curry is entering that LeBron category to where it's just a number. It doesn't seem to affect his production on a night in and night out basis. We're going to see it as far as games played throughout the year. He's not going to play all 82. He might not get to 70. So that's something where age may factor in throughout the totality of a season. But when he's on the floor, you expect those kind of moments. And for him to come off of a tough shooting performance against Phoenix, I expected him to bounce back. And not that you can expect a 40-burger on every single night, but it's almost like maybe it was the energy and the environment at Golden One. Maybe it was just a natural kind of resurgence from Curry. But at this point in his career, even though he is almost 36 years old, I have come to expect these kind of performances. And I think the Warriors have too. And they've certainly needed it, to your point, having not maybe a second or even third consistently other offensive option to go beside him.
And one of the things you start to look at this entire season is, well, what happens if he has to miss games?
Yeah.
And that's where, as much as I think the Warriors are comfortable with the decision they made to move off of Jordan Poole, how does this team function if they don't have Steph Curry? Because at times it looks like they might not have enough offense with Steph Curry, number one, but it also looks like they may not have enough offense with Steph Curry going off, number two, which is another level of uh-oh.
Yeah, no, I mean, like, if the Warriors can find a consistent set of rotating characters, and this is where I do think Kuminga, and we haven't mentioned him a whole lot, but also Moses Moody becomes so important for this team. If those are dependable options that can give you, on a given night where you have your full cast, 20 to 25 good minutes, well, then I feel comfortable if a Curry or a Klay or obviously a Draymond who's not there and may return during this road trip. Who's to say if it's going to be Sunday? Probably sometime next week. But if those guys are out, they will need players to step up in their place. And that's where I do think, even though he didn't play consistently well throughout the season, I was wondering how much they would miss Jordan Poole's ability to kind of fluctuate roles to play all 82 games. They don't have a whole lot of guys outside of Kuminga and Moody that I think can rise to the occasion of playing more minutes and being out there on the floor each and every night and remaining healthy and productive. So if Curry has to miss games, you are going to need to see games like for Moody and Kuminga. Last night, 47 minutes combined, they're a plus 20, and we were talking about in the first segment how Kuminga flipped the script on his game particularly. I think those guys are going to be extremely important for the Warriors if they want to kind of hold off some of the inevitable games, which comes with having an aging roster. And I would throw Chris Paul in that category as well. He's in year 19. He's the oldest guy that's playing. I think he had played 34 minutes against Phoenix, 30 last night. like those guys are eventually going to miss games, and you're going to need players that are younger to fill those roles and do it well.
Yeah, I mean, Chris Paul has just, I think he's been tremendous in terms of controlling. I hadn't made a three yet in either game, which, at some point he's going to have to do that, 0 of 6 and 0 of 2, but just to keep the defense honest. But I think as far as just controlling game and playing with the other stars, I think that to me has worked out to this point. I don't think that, maybe a little vulnerable defensively at times against the Suns. I didn't think they were really vulnerable last night, which kind of surprised me. I thought the Kings had the ability to maybe make the Warriors look a little bit old. They really didn't. I mean, the only point in the game where the Kings really were in control was that bench, time in the first half. Yeah, they got it rolling down the stretch, but again, I think that was more the game kind of turned into mop-up, and then the Kings were like, no, we're still playing, and then all of a sudden you look up and it's a close game. So I was really pleasantly surprised with the fact that the Warriors, with their main guys out there, didn't look old. And maybe that's just some of the comfort ability that comes through with the matchup and, those two teams facing off against each other, 15 of the last 20 games, it seems like, or something like that, going back to last year at the end of the year in the playoff series and the preseason games and all of that. So, but yeah, it's, sometimes it's great. And the overarching theme is it looks like Steph has still got it. Like that box is checked because you start to go through the vision for the Warriors of what they want this team to be. Steph's got it. Steph is, he's still got the ability to be that player that he has been. But when you start going up and down the list, I think that's where the question marks still come in, and we're not going to know the answer through two games. I think last night was better than the first night, but we're going to have to see how it all shakes out against some of these other opponents coming up with a lot of road games. Can Klay be a more consistent version of what he was last year? Can Wiggins be 2 years ago as opposed to last year, opening night, Minnesota Wiggs? Can Chris Paul hold up over the course of a long haul, plus the playoffs, and then all the role players that we've been able to get into in the first hour of the show here as well?
Yeah, I think there's still some broad questions. I'm sure over the next couple of hours until noon, we'll certainly dig into them, specifically with Klay and Wiggins. But to kind of piggyback off your first point about Chris Paul, he was probably the biggest question mark entering this season. And for those that maybe haven't followed the preseason as closely as you, JD, for everyone to see the first two times Chris Paul in regular season action, I have to imagine those questions and concerns are pretty much quelled. And the question now is just how healthy will he remain throughout a season? But he's fit in pretty seamlessly, and I think the absence of Draymond has helped that because Draymond is a more ball-dominant player offensively, and he's going to be initiating a lot of stuff when he comes back. But for him not to be there has allowed Chris Paul to play the way that he's accustomed to playing, also merging into the pace of play with the Warriors. And I do want to kind of get your thoughts on this. Do you think that the lack of shooting or the lack of being able to make a three so far in 2 games is because Paul isn't necessarily used to playing the up and down, pull-up three, transition type of game? And he's had some set shots. It's not as if everything he's taken has been in transition. But do you think that aspect of what the Warriors do has affected the three-point shot, and he's just kind of getting used to it at this point?
Yeah, I just think he's had some good looks and he's just missed them to this point. Like I think he's fit fine. I'm not sure if the pace has made him more fatigued or anything like that. I mean, time will tell. But I just think as he has aged, I've noticed it just from watching him even last year and at the end of the season 2 years ago. His shot is not quite what it was. And so the 3-point shot and even the mid-range shot. And he's been steady. He was pretty steady with the mid-range last night, but it rims in and out a little bit more now, I think, and last year than it used to. So I think that's just the natural aging process, probably more than anything. But I also think that his ability to knock down those shots, assuming he can do it, really provides an added mid-ground dynamic to the Warriors offense that just hasn't been there these last few years.
Yeah, and again, I do think that, look, I've also been impressed with Chris Paul's ability to kind of bounce, because I think defensively there was a little concern of, all right, how good could he be on ball, or specifically at the point of attack? I think he's done a pretty good job at being able to body bigger guards. I mean, no one's going to keep De'Aaron Fox in front of them for long. He was absolutely sensational in the fourth quarter of that basketball game last night. But I think defensively, he's looked better than I expected. The shooting, I think, is going to come, but what he's provided so far is just a stability when he has the rock that even with Curry sometimes, I wonder how loose he is with the basketball. And we saw it with a couple of fourth quarter turnovers. When the Kings started to press, when they started to trap, when they start to do what they did all of last season down the stretch of fourth quarters, I think that the Warriors got a little revved up, they got a little quick, and they got loose with the basketball. Chris Paul, the 12 assists and 3 turnovers last night, I think, to me, that type of assist to turnover ratio is something that has been missing in Golden State for a long time, and to have a particular player that you can plug and play at the end of games, or even in situations throughout the game where it's starting to get away from you, I think he creates a floor that I believe Chris Paul has been maybe not appreciated for enough throughout his career, because he is able to read the tempo of a game. He's able to be kind of a general on the floor. And I think that it is so important for the Warriors, and even Draymond, who has some aspect of that to his game, still has those kind of moments where you wonder what the hell he was thinking with the basketball. I feel confident when Chris Paul is on the floor that even if you're giving up a little bit of shooting, you might not have the one-on-one or pick-and-roll score that he used to be earlier in his career. You have someone that is going to make sure that the possession generally is going to produce a good shot, or is going to produce an open look for someone. And that is a feeling that I have not always had with the Warriors, even when they're playing good basketball and when Steph has it going. So to have someone that can initiate the offense and can also open things up for Steph, I think is extremely important, because Curry's allowed to hunt a little bit more as the two alongside Chris Paul. And I think there might be more games where we see Steph in the 20 to 25 shot range, because he doesn't have to worry about taking care of the ball.
And that allows him to be able to maybe make up for some of the fact that the Warriors don't have the second and third level scorers. I thought it was interesting last night. You had Chris Paul in the postgame press conference in Sacramento saying that Klay Thompson and Steph Curry make the game easier for him. I think it works both ways.
Totally.
I think he also makes the game easier for both of them, assuming in Klay's case that he's able to stay patient enough himself. All right, 1 hour in the books, 888-957-9570. John Dickinson and Evan Giddings. Phone calls, text messages. Are you more optimistic about the positive things you've seen to this point, or pessimistic regarding some of the potential problem spots for this Warriors team? They're 1-1. Big win last night in Sacramento, dropped a close one to the Suns, on to Houston tomorrow. We're getting into all of it from now until noon right here, Warriors This Week on 95.7 The Game.
At Bank of America, there's one question we ask our customers to learn what matters most. It's not, how much money do you have? It's not even, how much money would you like to have? No, our question isn't about money. It's about you and what you want to achieve. Because that's what's most important.
4 with you until noon here on 95.7 The Game and up on YouTube as well. Join us on YouTube as we have that up and running here on 95.7 The Game, so you can check us out that way. Evan, great job. I know you've been working tirelessly with Craig to try and get that rolling here for the first hour of the show. And so we're up and running for the final 2. Good stuff.
Oh, yeah. No, a little behind-the-scenes work. Craig, one of the hardest-working men of the business as well. So, hey, we're glad we got the audio as well as the visual medium for people out there. And I'm glad that Craig came back with that Kerr cut that you were referencing earlier, JD, because as much as
shots fired at Jordan Poole.
Yeah, exactly. As much as I do believe that this year is not last year and that he's not focused on last year, I'm 100% with you in the first hour, which was a big win to get on the road, and it was a completely fair question. And for him to dismiss it almost makes me feel like they're just trying to completely eviscerate any thought of the 2022-23 season, because on the road it was perplexing. It was a conundrum. They couldn't seem to figure it out. And so Kerr's just saying, hey, look, I don't know what happened last year on the road. I don't care about it anymore. This is a brand new clean slate, and I'm just all steaming ahead.
888-957-9570, 888-957-9570. It's John Dickinson, Evan Giddings here on 95.7 The Game as Warriors this week with you on a Saturday. 925 on the Comcast Business text line. I found this interesting. It's Dublin Marge checking in. I wanted Klay off the bench during the closing minutes. He's not good in the closing minutes. Rather see Moody or GP2. I wouldn't take Steve Kerr's statement that every single game is going to be determined by who's playing the best on that given night as far as who's going to finish. Now, he did do it with Kuminga and Wiggins, and I thought it was a bigger statement about Wiggins in the way he was playing in game one. But Klay was more than good enough last night. If the Warriors can get that Klay last night consistently, they're going to win a lot of games, even with him only scoring 18 points. The Klay that's going to kill him is the Klay that they got in game one.
I'm 100% with you. And I think because of Andrew Wiggins' performance or lack of performance, however you want to describe it, in game one, Klay was maybe let off the hook a little bit. But last night in Sacramento, he was the least of my concerns. There appeared to be, even early on, Also from Wiggins, too, a difference in mindset. From Wiggins, it was being more aggressive. And for Klay Thompson, it was being less aggressive or letting the game come to him a little bit more. And I know that was a product of Curry having the hot hand. And I also think Chris Paul initiating the offense had a little bit to do. He was trying to force the ball to Wiggins early. I think scored 6 of the first 8 points. You could tell there was a different tone from him, at least early on in the basketball game. But for Klay Thompson, if that's the Klay you're going to get, I think that's the Klay at this stage in his career that every Warriors fan should want. There is a potential for him, of course, to burst out and hit 10 threes in a game, and he's going to have a few of those. Who knows? It could come against Houston like he had a big game against last year. It could be on Sunday. But for Klay Thompson, in games in which the Warriors are going to be pitted against potential playoff opponents and tough environments, to me, he cannot play out of character for him, which is too aggressive. You see a ball go in, the next 2 shots cannot go up immediately once it hits your hands. That kind of Klay Thompson, to me, is the one that can shoot you out of a basketball game, as opposed to the one we saw last night who felt, to me, JD, like the game was coming to him rather than him trying to impose himself on the game.
I would sign up for that Klay Thompson every night. And because you're going to win a lot of games against a lot of bad teams with a steady Klay Thompson like that. Now, you may need a little more to beat some of the great teams in the league, but to me, you jump off that bridge when you get to it. I agree with you. He's still going to have the games where he goes off and hits 8, 10 threes. Like, that's going to be there. The bigger concern for me is the bad games. The bad games have to not be as bad as they were last year or as bad as they were shooting. I actually thought Klay played a pretty good game other than the shooting against the Suns, but the shooting is ultimately what did him in. All right, 888-957-9570. No Cap in Oakland. Let's get to the phones here on a Saturday morning. What's going on, No Cap?
You guys hear me?
Yeah, loud and clear.
All right, cool. I love the show. I just want to say this is something that nobody has really talked about at all since it came out. Joe Laker was on the TK podcast around about 2 months ago, and he said that he wants to be under the second apron next season. And so that's telling me that, of course, he's going to let Chris Paul walk. How do you guys feel about that? And do you think it's a good idea? Personally, I don't. Pretty much he said that's why he traded Poole to get under the second apron, because he said that he's not able to bail out the team if he's over the second apron. What do you guys thoughts about that? Thanks, guys.
I mean, look, I think Joe Lacob has shown that he'll adjust a tentative plan if he thinks that spending more money can help the team contend for a championship. So while I think that's a guideline, to me, it was more a guideline for the ability just to have flexibility to help this team in the short term, to try and make one more run at a title, and then see where you're at. And if you feel like the rest of it isn't at a point where you can continue to contend, then you have that option to get under the second apron if you want to use it. You don't necessarily have to use it if you think that you still have enough to be able to win a title. So to me, that's more of a conversation for April, May, June, July down the line. It does relate to Klay Thompson though as well, and the latest reports this week, another report about the Warriors and Klay Thompson, Evan, not being close on a deal. I was at shoot around yesterday. Klay was asked about it in Sacramento. He on the one hand said doesn't want to get into it, prefers not to even think about it. No formal tabling of talks necessarily. Yeah. But then he goes on to say, hey, I'm going to savor this year as if it could be the last. And the question implied could be the last. He didn't say that specifically about it being the last, but everybody knows the rat on the table here as far as the fact that the farther this thing goes, it could be Klay Thompson's last year in a Warriors uniform. So I think those long-winded way of saying, I think the determination about luxury tax and aprons and levels and all of that is going to be determined solely on how good this team is this season.
Yeah, I think that's well said, JD, because at this point, more than any other in the Warriors dynasty, it's a year-to-year league. It's a year-to-year team. And I think Joe Lacob, along with now Mike Dunleavy Jr., understand that. And Chris Paul, to me, which factors into your overarching kind of point about the significance of last night's win, but also a significant. It's going to be significant for the Warriors to get off to a good start, which is because I do think this is Chris Paul's likely only year in Golden State. That his contract is non-guaranteed after this year. For no cap in Oakland. To his question about trying to get under the second apron, I think that is a priority for Joe Lacob and the Warriors. Chris Paul factors into that. So does Klay Thompson. But if this season goes well, I do think that a guy like Klay could be rewarded with a contract. It's one of the reasons why I felt like they were not going to get a deal done before the season, because I didn't believe Klay was in a position of great leverage coming off that postseason series. I just think he believes that he's a better player than that and would be able to maximize his value by playing through another year. Potentially, if he leads the league in three again, 3-point makes, and does what he wants to do, I think he can earn himself a sizable amount of money moving forward. That said, for Chris Paul, I just feel like the Warriors are in a kind of a financial pickle, and I don't want to get too deep into it, but to where this season, they're trying to maximize it as much as possible, and then next season, they'll try and maximize that season as much as they can, however they can. So, to me, Chris Paul is, and why I've been so impressed with him off the bat is, they do need to get off to a good start. I do think they need to create some cushion and capture and kind of stack some wins for when inevitably a guy here and there gets hurt or has to miss games, and they will taper off a little bit. So if Chris Paul is not a concern for me with how he's playing early in the season, I don't even need to think about what's happening in April or next offseason, because I think the Warriors are solely focused on now, and I think that's also the tone that we heard from Steve Kerr in that last cut, not just about what's happening last season or what happened last season, but Steve Kerr's also in a contract year as well. He does not need to focus on what's happening after this season. At this point, it's all about the here and the now, and I think both Klay and Chris Paul would be aligned in that message, and I think it will benefit both of them.
Yeah, I mean, the Warriors may find themselves in a position where they need Chris Paul, or they need somebody that provides what he provides next year at a different rate if they're going to want to contend. But I think you said it. They're year to year right now. At any point, the Warriors could decide, as much as they've doubled down and tripled down on the big three, at any point they could decide that they're not good enough anymore to contend for titles and pivot. Mm-hmm. and make a big move to try to go about it a different way. But by continuing to re-sign the players that they've re-signed and to go out and get Chris Paul, it gives them an option to be able to continue to make moves, right? If you just start not signing guys completely, well, then you lose the right to do anything. And that's where I do think Chris Paul's contract comes into play. Not necessarily that they're just going to get off the money, but in the fact that they can do what Phoenix did and trade him somewhere to a team that can take on the salary and use that as a means to facilitate other players coming back that maybe could be fit. Like you could trade Chris Paul as a $30 million player next season and take back a $20 million player and maybe a $10 million player that's going to get shipped elsewhere or as part of another deal. Like there are a bunch of different things you can do. So to turn Chris Paul into somebody else, a less expensive player, manage your finances, still have another player on the roster, and then figure it out as you go. I just don't view this thing as cut and dry. It's Chris Paul now. It's $30 million off the books for nothing next year. And maybe it turns into that, but to me, the only way it turns into that is if the Warriors deem themselves incapable of being able to contend for championships next year. And if they do that, then we're going to be talking about bigger things than just Chris Paul not being around.
Yeah, and I think you kind of echoed the sentiment we've heard from both Joe Lacob, Mike Dunleavy, and even Steve Kerr, which is the theme of optionality. And that's not just a financial term I think that the front office has been using, but I also think on the floor, JD, we are starting to see a little more of the optionality within the flow of play that Chris Paul brings to the team and how many different options Steve Kerr is going to have throughout the game with his rotations. And we're all still waiting to see how Draymond factors into this because he is certainly going to be a factor. But right now, you could look at it either way. Either you have options down the stretch of games. I know we've heard people calling, for more Moody. Kuminga got to finish the game in game 1 because Wiggins wasn't playing very well. When Draymond comes back, how small are they going to be? What defensively are they going to look like? Are they going to be able to take care of the ball better than they did last night in the fourth quarter against Sacramento? There are many more options, both financially for the Warriors, but also on the floor for Steve Kerr. And so I'm very curious to see how that is going to change in the first 10 to 15 games if we're going to see Steve Kerr find that rotation far quicker than he did last year when he was willing to give minutes sparingly to some of the younger guys, or the fact that the Moody's and Kumingas and GP2s have looked solid, and the bench unit overall has looked much stronger at the beginning of this season than last, to where we're actually not going to see Steve Kerr have to flex that sort of optionality late in basketball games.
Yeah, I mean, I think you look at it and the guys that are going to play. I think Steph and Klay are going to play, Wiggins, Draymond, Looney, Chris Paul. Those 6 are going to play. I think the Warriors now know that Peyton and Moody and Kuminga and Saric are all going to play. Well, right there, that's 10 right there that are going to play. It's just the combination of how much are they going to play. And then I think as you go 11 and 12, you've got Trace Jackson-Davis, who I think we've seen may not play at all, as was the case on Tuesday night, may get a 5-minute run. Either in the first or the second half. Steve Kerr does break his center spot up frequently into almost 4 blocks a half, right? There's like a 6-minute block at the first quarter, 6-minute block, bottom of the first quarter. I almost think of it sometimes as innings, right? Who's the top of the first, bottom of the first? Who's the top of the second, bottom of the second? Who's the top of the third, bottom of the third? And so he used Trace Jackson-Davis for basically to break up what had been Saric's time in the first half. And so he gave Jackson Davis the bottom of the third basically, and still gave Saric the top of the fourth. So I think that's how he's going to be used. Podziemski, I think, is an injury away from needing to be pressed into action, and I think the Warriors feel better about the fact that he may need to be pressed into. If he needs to be pressed into action, that they can get something out of him than they maybe did, in the summer league. So I think that's a nice problem to have. So I think the 10 that are going to play, plus the 2 young players. It's just a matter of what are the combinations that can get you through the night. And I do think, Evan, it's tricky, and I think last night shows that it's tricky because combinations that worked against Phoenix didn't work against the Kings and may not work against Houston. And I think the Warriors are going to find themselves in these matchup-specific nights where it's the Kings didn't make the Warriors look old last night, even though I thought they had the potential to do it. But the Rockets might, even though the Rockets stink. And so, you're going to find, for all we know, the Rockets are going to be the team that makes Chris Paul look old. For as not good as they are. And so you're going to have to adjust on that night. Maybe Chris Paul can actually withstand the Phoenixes and the Kings and the Clippers and the Lakers and all that. But the games where he struggles are going to be the games against some of the more young, erratic, athletic type teams. And then you're going to have to, all right, how do you offset that? And so I think the balancing act for Steve Kerr, while he likes the team and thinks he has a lot of pieces, it's going to be tricky, and he's going to have to push the right buttons, I think, night in, night out, and that's without dealing with the injuries that eventually are going to come.
And I think that's why the stability of the second unit, and granted it's only been 2 games, but so far has looked like there's more of a floor as opposed to the inconsistency we saw from the bench throughout the majority of last season, and really just kind of a rotating door. The Anthony Lambs, the Ty Jeromes that were getting a lot of minutes were basically necessary, whether you agree or disagree with the usage, because Steve Kerr was not getting what he wanted from other players. Now it looks like the fact that you can plug and play a guy like Moses Moody, and he's so far in the month of October, including preseason, shooting nearly 60% from three-point range, you know that there's a little more stability from the guys that are having to come in and replace the starters. If anything, the inconsistency has been more from the starting five through the first two games than anything else. I think the second unit has done a pretty good job of keeping games either at the same place or, in the case of last night against Sacramento in that third quarter, improving your position. So, and I think that the two young guys that you mentioned, the two rookies, also factor into that too. A guy like Brandon Podziemski, more of an on-ball, at least I thought he was marketed as maybe a 2, but he appears to be more of a point guard that can control the rock and take care of it. Trace Jackson-Davis is someone who's not going to necessarily hurt you, or at least hasn't shown himself to hurt you throughout the few minutes that he's sparingly going to get. And so I think Steve Kerr has more dependable options to pull from throughout not only the 10 that you mentioned, but of course the 2 on the back end. And I think that is valuable for a team that might not be as quick to get up and down as they were in years past, is going to be a little bit older, is going to look for more of those half-court sets, and is going to need things defensively to be in a solid place against teams that can run it up like Sacramento, or of course even on Sunday like Houston. The Rockets are not a very good team, but if you let them into a basketball game, they can get hot. They're basically too stupid to know that they should be losing that game, and I think that's a concern that was last season. That, to me, hopefully is not going to carry over as much into this year, because Kerr feels more comfortable with the guys that he has to call upon. And I think Kuminga and Moody specifically are guys that were fluctuating last season in their roles. This season appear to have a little more of a concrete understanding of what both they need to do as well as what the team needs to do when they're on the floor.
888-957-9570, 888-957-9570. Warriors this week. John Dickinson, Evan Giddings here on 95.7 The Game. We're with you until noon and with you each and every Saturday morning here on 95.7 The Game from 9 a.m. until noon. A couple of text messages just quickly here before we pause. 347, what's the deal with the turnovers in the fourth quarters? It's a bit concerning. Can you touch on this? We did touch on a little bit in the first hour. I thought last night, and I had the number looking at the first two games collectively, the Warriors have 14 turnovers in the fourth quarters of the first two games. They have 15 turnovers in the other 6 quarters combined. So they're not turning it over at all, quarters 1 through 3. In fact, that pace of those first 3 quarters, if it carried through the fourth quarter, and it really did in the first game in terms of the overall number, but that pace is excellent. Like, if you're going to turn it over at that level, that's excellent. But the fourth quarters have changed the game. I thought last night it was two different things. I thought they were more careless against the Suns. I thought last night they just didn't handle the trap well. I think the Kings started aggressively trapping the Warriors, trying to get back into the game by forcing some turnovers. And I thought Steph Curry and Chris Paul didn't handle it well. I mean, at one point, Chris Paul had 18 assists and 1 turnover, and then I think he ended up with 3 turnovers after that, and I want to say they were all in the fourth quarter last night. So he didn't handle the trap well on a couple of possessions. Steph didn't handle it well on a couple of possessions, and I think I don't want to say they were surprised by it, but I mean there were too many times where they were dribbling to a point where they could be attacked by the sideline. Like, the sideline is an extra defender. You're basically getting triple teamed when you've got the double team and then this plus the sideline. So there were a couple of times where they just, killed themselves on the trap. So that to me was the bigger concern last night.
Yeah, and I think that had more to do with, like you're talking about, kind of the opponent. And I think Sacramento, that's a team that is going to, when they're down in fourth quarters, try and get up in your grill. And I think also going to Duarte as opposed to Herter. Duarte's a much better defender than him, and I think he was able to kind of make both Curry as well as Chris Paul uncomfortable. Like, there was a double team and a trap set up near half court down the stretch of that fourth quarter, in which Chris Paul he kind of had a deer in the headlight look, and that's not something you're accustomed to seeing.
He was just overwhelmed.
Chris Paul. Yeah, he couldn't get the ball out. He
gave the ball up. He's like, I got to give it to you. And then there was one where he took a timeout, which was smart.
Yeah.
But But yeah, man, I mean, it was uncharacteristic for sure.
Yeah, and I think that was a more specific game type of deal, but it is certainly something to note and something I'm sure teams will try to employ if they need to against this Warriors team, because I'm sure everyone, especially younger teams, Sacramento, Houston's one of them that's coming up on the ledger, like those are teams that are probably looking at the Warriors and saying, we're going to test your stamina, your athleticism, and your ability to take care of the basketball. Those are all things that the Warriors are going to have to overcome throughout this season, and something that might even carry into the postseason should they be able to get there with good position. So, yes, I don't think it's necessarily a concern, because also they were in that position and against Phoenix, they only turned over the ball 11 times, I think 5 times through the first 3 quarters, and kind of at a similar clip through the first 3 quarters against Sacramento before the 8 in the fourth. Like, those are, yes, that's a time where you need to get and lock up the basketball, but also I'm not going to overlook the fact that they've done an excellent job of taking care of the rock through the first 36 minutes of the basketball game, and that's not always something we saw last year.
All right, he's Evan Giddings. I'm John Dickinson. We're halfway through here on a Saturday. 888-957-9570. More phone calls and text messages. Are you more optimistic about the positive things you've seen through 2 games, or concerned with some of the negative things you've seen through 2 games with the Warriors at 1-1? Warriors this week rolling on here, 95.7 The Game.
Black Friday is coming, and that's the smart time to shop for a top-rated TV from Samsung, LG, or Sony. But why wait? You can get those Black Friday TV deals right now at Video Only, and then enjoy Thanksgiving with your new TV. Still want to wait? Then how about better than Black Friday deals? The top-rated
a bitterness or an anger with some of the rivalries. There's like a mutual respect, I think, component to it. And there's just so many connections between the two franchises right now. Maybe if they play in another playoff series or two, it gets a little bit bitter. But right now it feels more like just a positive energy when these two teams play.
Yeah, I do think there is something to, like, for example, if the Kings had beaten the Warriors in 7 games last year in the postseason, I do think there would be room for more of a rivalry. But because there's one team with the 4 championships who appears to be the big brother and the team that's trying to get where the big brother is, and there is that respect to the point where, 48 hours ago, De'Aaron Fox announces that he's going to be wearing Curry shoes, and he's under Curry's brand. That doesn't generally play into a heated, animated type of rivalry. I think that most of the Kings, outside of Harrison Barnes probably, feel pretty good about the relationships with the Warriors, and it's a lot of respect. To me, there's not enough bad blood to consider it a rivalry between the teams, but I do absolutely feel like the fans believe it to be a rivalry for them, and I think it is pretty palpable, the type of energy in and around Golden 1 when the Warriors come into town. Not just last year in the playoffs, but even last night, JD, that is a place where I can see it being a little bit hostile and the Warriors walking into a building they know is going to bring the energy more so than when the Kings come to Chase Center.
There was a great moment last night, mid-game, and I want to say it was third quarter, second or third quarter. But Draymond Green, the Warriors, I think, had made a basket, and the Kings were bringing the ball up the court. So this is during play, just kind of a ho-hum moment in the game. And whoever was running the game ops at Golden One Center just flashed to Draymond Green, just put Draymond Green on the Warriors bench on the scoreboard. And everybody in the place kind of out of nowhere is like, what? And I just happened to be looking up at the board when it happened, and I don't think everybody in the building saw it. But then all of a sudden, as the Kings are bringing the ball up the court, there's just this rash of startling boos, and it's like, what is going on? And Draymond, he just looks right at the camera and just gives just a big old Draymond smile and gives the peace sign, like, yeah, what's up? And then quick cutaway to back to live action. It reminded me in a good way of last year in Game 2 and the ejection and him getting up and shouting at the fans there and everything. It was just, it has been good. It has been intense. I think the NBA does need more. They need more teams that I don't know. I think the teams like each other, but they need more of that intensity, which borders on rivalry. I think it's good for the game, and I think Warriors Kings, as much as they're going to play it out here in the first month of the season because they're going to play 3 times. Of their 4 meetings, I do think it's good for ball to have these two playing the types of games that they're playing.
Yeah, I'm with you, and I think it also extracts the best out of both sides. I mean, it is sure you're going to see some tension, you're going to see some blood boiling between the two teams, but hopefully you're also going to see a performance like you saw from Stephen Curry. Not that he needs that sort of rivalry atmosphere to bring the best out of him. But I do think, and you said this in our first hour, JD, I do think he relishes those kind of moments to be able to quiet a crowd on the road, to kind of dig into their chest and just pull their heart out right in front of them, lay it there on the hardwood, and say, this is my building. And so far in the last 2 games that Stephen Curry's played in the Golden One, it has been his building. It is where he's looked comfortable. He has shot it at an outrageous rate. And so I think that those are the kind of performances that do add to a budding rivalry, so to speak. I think there's still not enough bad blood for me to label it one in the traditional sense. But by the end of the season, there might be, and there could, who knows, there could be a moment, next Wednesday at Chase Center in which the Kings come into the Warriors building and grab a W from them. Like, all of that kind of builds up to what Steve Kerr is talking about, which is maybe a game here, a playoff series there, and another one that just continues to add to what I think the NBA doesn't really have a lot of, which is teams that have disdain for each other and individuals that have those kind of one-on-one rivalries that they take into a game and make it an individual, sort of one-on-one bout within the team scope. I don't think there's as much of that around the NBA.
All right, let's get back to the phones. 888-957-9570. Mark in Millbrae is next here on 95.7 The Game. Hey, Mark.
Yeah, what's up, guys? Yeah, to me, once Draymond gets back, we know that burdening rivalry with the Kings intensifies, because him and Sabonis do not like each other at all, and then that's a major bad blood, especially from Sabonis' end. So I think that's going to ratchet up once he gets there. But as far as this matchup, it's incredible. To me, that Curry versus Fox head-to-head battle is as good as any in the league, and Curry just showing the Young Bucks why he's still the GOAT. When you can go into that hostile building like they have and continually dominate them like he does is incredible. But overall, guys, we know this team is veteran Latin savvy, but I hope Kurt really plays the young guys in rotation, because we know they're one injury away with the vets and wear and tear of these guys of having to rely on them. So to me, I think that guy's got to be Kuminga. He's got to show that he's going to be part of this future core, and he's going to be relied upon this year to show it. And it's funny when you think about it, because he's only, 21? But I think he's due for, a contract extension. So it's going to be fascinating to see if he's going to take the Bulls by the horn this year and be that guy. As far as the rotation, do you guys think coming off is going to be GP2, Moody, and Saric are the guys that Kerr is going to rely on going forward? What do you thought in terms of them going forward, set rotation, and in terms of how they're going to approach going on the road after that debacle last year, having the most bizarre season, dominant at home and awful on the road? I'll take your thoughts on all that. Thanks for the time, guys.
Yeah, appreciate it. I think when Draymond comes back, he's probably going to come off the bench initially, but Chris Paul's going to come off the bench eventually. And I think with some of the reporting over the last week, I think that's, that CP would be okay with it and that's trending in that way. I think that's what Shams had a few days ago. I think ultimately that's going to be the plan when Draymond is back and the Warriors are whole. I mean, we laid it out a little bit in the last segment. I mean, I think Moody's playing, GP's playing. We know Kuminga's playing. We know Saric is playing. And so I think that, that's going to be the group with Chris Paul as the fifth bench player and then the five starters. So I think those 10 are basically playing every single night in some form or fashion, and then it's a matter of Podziemski and Trace Jackson-Davis and maybe Corey Joseph, who I thought when they signed him, maybe he would have the potential to play a little bit. He didn't look quite right at this point, and he wasn't good against Phoenix, and Kerr went away from him last night in that matchup. I think probably rightfully so. But I mean, I think those are the guys.
Yeah, and I think that's, look, Kuminga and Moody have to play. Like, they're playing themselves into being consistent rotation players.
And 20 and 25 for Kuminga in terms of minutes. Just apologies for cutting you off there, but like that's about right. Like, to get 25 minutes for Kuminga last night, that's solid. Moody's had basically 20 in both games. Like, that's what it looks like when you're in the rotation as a young player.
Yeah, no doubt. And I think to have three guys off the bench, I know Peyton didn't quite get to 20, but a rotation of 8 or 9 guys at this point, and then you factor in Draymond Green, there's your 9 or 10 on a nightly basis. And so I think Kuminga and Moody need to play to the point of the collar. But where Steve Kerr has, I think, a little more in his bag that he can go to this season compared to last is now with Moody and Kuminga having taken the first 2 seasons to kind of ramp up. And however you feel about how Steve Kerr used them in their rookie or sophomore season, at this point doesn't matter as much because they now appear to be prepared for what the minutes are there for them and what they've been given thus far. And they've taken full advantage of them, specifically Moody, at any point that he's come in so far. Now also getting a guy like Dario Saric, who, yes, last season coming off the ACL did not play as many minutes per game, but at one point in his career, he's been a 25-minute per game player. Gary Payton can give you 15 to 20 minutes consistently every single night. So the caller's asking about what's going to happen when or if a Curry misses a game, a Paul misses a game, Draymond is missing games. I don't think there's going to be as much sort of looking around trying to find players that can play out of character because I think Kerr, with the progression of Kuminga along with Moody, as well as a few of the players, mainly Dario Saric, as well as Chris Paul, who they've brought in, who have already at one point in their career played significant minutes, I think there is a potential to where Steve Kerr is not going to be as concerned about some of those games where big boys are missing time because he has a reliable cast of characters that he can go to that he's seen either earlier in their career or early on this season that can step in and fill those minutes and do them well.
Yeah, I'm still worried about Steph or Klay being out, and or even Wiggins for that matter, in terms of how does this team function and get enough offense? Because I think at times they look like they might not have enough offense even with those guys on given nights. So I'm not going to dismiss it like it's going to be really bad, but I am concerned. And Steph is probably going to miss 20 plus games. It looks great 2 games in, but that's just been the norm really for these last couple of years. I thought it was interesting. Klay Thompson said his goal is to play 70 plus games yesterday at shoot around. I know he started playing back-to-backs last year, which is something that he wanted to do. How do the Warriors handle back-to-backs? I think is going to be interesting, and we'll get our first taste of that with the game in Houston tomorrow and then Monday in New Orleans, the second of the back-to-back when the Warriors go there before coming home. All right, 888-957-9570. Let's go to Scott in Berkeley next year on 95.7 The Game. Hey, Scott.
Gentlemen, long time no hear from.
Yeah, good to be back with you.
Scotty.
Yeah, well, it's nice to be back in the country. I guess what I would think about over the last 2 nights is this. The first thing is, would the trap have worked against the Warriors the way that it did last night if Draymond had played? My suspicion is probably no, because he probably would have seen it coming at him and then passed over it. So, the Kings ran the trap both at Steph and at Chris, and it hemmed them up. In a way, that's fine. The fact that they got the road win out of the way is good. What worries me is that they have now won 3 straight road games at Golden 1, and I'm beginning, and, in the back of your mind, you're kind of asking yourself, so is this the only place they can win on the road? The last thing I guess I'm going to throw out there is about Chris, and it isn't so much that I analogize him to the guy that he was traded for. I kind of look at him and I think of him more like Sean Livingston. And I know this is going to sound weird to people for a second because you're thinking of Sean's height versus Chris's height. But when Sean decided to shoot the ball, his shot was always going to be the jumper in the lane, or the turnaround, I guess, off the left post. We know with Chris that eventually his pet shot is always going to be the snake dribble into the fade. And it's kind of like it's almost like he becomes the post option in a weird way. I think it's going to be fine because there are going to be the nights where all of a sudden Chris goes hot, and Steve will probably ride it out. And it'll be interesting to see how that plays out when it happens, and especially if Draymond's in the lineup and suddenly realizes, oh, Chris is in the groove. So that's all I'm thinking. And if you guys want to go with that offline, I'm happy with it. Good talking to you. I'll talk to you soon.
Appreciate it, Scott. I spot on with Draymond. I'm still concerned. I think if the trap with Draymond, he's always the guy you kick it to, and then Draymond, it's like having an extra point guard out there. So Steph sees it, hits Draymond, and then Draymond's in control on the back half when you have a 4-on-3. So he decides whether to push it to somebody to score, keep it moving, attack, get it back to Steph, or in this case CP. So all of that is definitely different, I think, if you have Draymond on the floor. Without a doubt. As far as I'm still worried, Evan. I'm still worried about and I don't even disagree with the premise on there is a little bit of Livingston, I think, in Chris Paul. No doubt. I get that comparison, but in terms of the steadiness and all of that, I still don't know where the Warriors are going to get offense if they lose one of their one or a couple of their primary scorers.
Yeah, I mean, look, if Steph goes down for an extended period of time, the Warriors are in trouble. I mean, look, if they didn't have him last night, they lose that game. But to his point about Chris Paul, I certainly see the comparison, kind of the steadiness that a Sean Livingston brought. But to me, Jay, I don't know how you feel about this, but the last real playmaking bench guard that I can remember who was kind of close to Paul, he was a little more volatile, but I'd go back to Jarrett Jack. That was a guy that I felt like could come and bring the ball up, could play off of Steph. It was really early in his career, granted, but that's who I kind of feel like he adds a little more punch with, specifically offensively, not as much on the defensive end. But I think for the Warriors, honestly, late in games, even with Draymond on the floor, I'm also still going to be kind of concerned because Draymond is not necessarily not a turnover-prone player. He can fall susceptible to getting loose with the rock and has had his share of fourth-quarter moments in which he's either given up a possession or not allowed the Warriors to maximize one. I think turnovers are going to be anytime the Golden State Warriors are in their kind of free flow, trying to ramp up their passes, they're going to turn the ball over. But the question is, can in those tight moments, in which I do think even if Chris Paul comes off the bench, if they have their full set of guys, I do think he needs to be in the game down the stretch in fourth quarters because of those kind of moments. If you have a CP3 with a Draymond, with a Curry, I do feel good that those three guys together can limit the amount of turnovers and can do a decent enough job defensively to allow for the fact that they might not be getting up and down as quickly as possible. But I hear Scott. I think Chris Paul brings a calmness that probably has not been there from the bench and specifically at the guard position since a guy like Sean Livingston.
888-957-9570. It's John Dickinson and Evan Giddings here on 95.7 The Game. A little bit of breaking news NFL-wise. Of course, this is Warriors this week, but we do want to keep everybody in the Bay updated on what's going on with the 49ers.
Oh, talk to me.
Who have just announced that Brock Purdy has cleared the concussion protocol. So Purdy will start tomorrow. No injury designation. Obviously, he had started to run through the protocol to be able to practice in a limited fashion on Thursday. He was a full participant at a lighter practice on Friday, had to be checked out again by the doctors today to be formally cleared to be able to play. And the 49ers just released a statement that Purdy has cleared that concussion exam through the NFL concussion protocol this morning. And so he has no injury designation. Kyle Shanahan said yesterday if he gets cleared, he starts. So Brock Purdy is starting tomorrow at Levi Stadium with the 49ers taking on the Bengals.
Yeah, and look, I mean, I think that Kyle Shanahan hinted at it earlier this week that he was, I don't want to say press it, because anytime that you're cleared from a concussion, you're eligible to play. And I think with how he handled the McCaffrey situation last week on Monday night against the Vikings, coming off an oblique, potential small tear, a rib injury, and Christian McCaffrey played bulk of the snaps. I think Kyle Shanahan is a guy that if someone is given the okay, he is going to play. And so I'm very interested to see how Brock Purdy bounces back, of course, from the concussion that he sustained later in that game, but also two relatively non-Brock Purdy performances, not taking care of the ball as much, and Cincinnati's a good opponent. So I'm happy that he's going to be on the field, and I'm interested to see how he bounces back.
All right, well, one more here before we go to break, and the show flying by this morning here on 95.7 The Game. Austin in San Jose is up here to close out hour number 2. What's going on, Austin?
Hey, fella, JD. Hey, man, how you doing? It's been a while. Always good to hear your voice at basketball time, my guy. Listen, couple things. First of all, Purdy, real quick on Purdy, man. I think Kyle's making a mistake. Man, if I'm the good thing Bounty Gate's gone, because I can guarantee there'd be guys going to take a shot right away. But listen, on the Warriors, last night, JD, a couple concerning things, man. The double teaming of Steph. That's something that Mike Brown obviously knows a lot about the Dubs, and hey, man, that almost works. That's something the Warriors are going to have to figure out. And I didn't see a lot of reaction. Turnovers were a problem. So that's something they're going to have to deal with. I am still concerned about Klay. I know Klay came through last night and had a couple big shots, but I started seeing it in preseason, and I got to see Klay, got to see more of Klay. I think that we got to see him do that more than just every fourth night. So without Klay being Klay, the Warriors are going to struggle this year. That's kind of where I'm at with. But hey, man, it's optimistic. Moody is surprising me. JK, I was always behind. You know that, JD. I was always a Kuminga fan, so that's not surprising. But the Moody thing is a real big surprise. So it's kind of early, but last thing, Chris Paul is trying to change the culture, believe it or not. He's helping to change the culture of the Warriors over time from being turnover machines to more discipline. So that's something to watch over the course of the year, guys. Thanks a lot.
Yeah, thanks, Austin. I mean, I think it comes down to margin for error. If the Warriors are going to maximize what they have this year, they're going to have to be more buttoned up, make fewer mistakes, and just maximize what they have on a night-in, night-out basis. And I do think for this season, and everything's 1 year at a time right now, Chris Paul does give them an opportunity to do that.
Yeah, and I think Chris Paul has made not only the effort before, but also in preseason and now during the regular season to, as Austin's talking about, try and impact that culture. I don't know how much he'll be able to change it in one season or maybe this year for longer than that, but he certainly has not been an issue that everyone assumed he might be. Like all of the concerns about the fit and kind of the culture shift, however you want to put it, has not been an issue for Chris Paul. And so I've been very impressed by that. And he's also been able to take it on the court to the point where he's calming things down in a game like Phoenix. He's saying, stop, like this possession cannot go this way. So I love what I've seen thus far.
All right, he's Evan Giddings. I'm John Dickinson. 2 hours down. We got 1 hour to come. 888-957-9570. A couple of phone lines open. The Comcast Business text line as well. We're live on YouTube. It's Warriors this week. We're off and running here for the 23-24 season on 95.7 The Game.
Discover, this is Danny.
Hi, it's Jen Coolidge. I just want to thank you for making me feel so special. I earned cash back on debit for my dinner party groceries.
That's great. But with Discover Cashback Debit, we give everyone cash back on everyday purchases.
calls on it because this is Warriors this week, but from a news standpoint, Brock Purdy has been cleared and will start as he gets through the concussion protocol. So he's going to start for the Niners tomorrow against the Bengals at Levi's. And the overarching question through 2 games, 1-1 for the Warriors, are you more optimistic about the good things you've seen or pessimistic about the potential problem points that you've seen from the Warriors through 2 games?
Yeah, I think so far, JD, for me, I'm feeling more optimistic than the things that have concerned me thus far. If I had to sort of list my biggest concerns at this point, they would revolve around 2 of the starters, and it'd be Klay Thompson and Andrew Wiggins. And those, to me, are concerns at this point. But I also think that Wiggins is a player who generally is kind of been up and down his entire career. So I don't expect a game like Phoenix to drag on throughout the season, but it's certainly something I'll make a note of. As for Klay Thompson, I think the first 2 games are pretty much what we've come to expect from Klay. Like a game where he's going to be throwing and chucking and hucking, and it might hurt you to the point where it could have been the difference, who knows, against Phoenix in a game that came down to the wire. He's also a guy that can self-correct, relatively speaking, game to game, and pull himself into a position now where he can get efficient with his looks, with the basketball, with shooting to a point where against Sacramento, I really didn't have too much bad to say about Klay Thompson, if anything at all. I thought he played very well, especially coming off of that game. And that's the kind of self-awareness that I hope that those 2 players can find ideally quickly, because I do think this is a very important part of the Warriors' schedule, unlike perhaps what Steve Kerr is kind of putting out after the game about not necessarily being just a big win. It's just another road game. Last year doesn't really matter. I think the self-awareness from Klay Thompson and Andrew Wiggins are things that can be corrected, and that's why I would feel more optimistic than pessimistic at this point.
Yeah, I think the question as it relates to Klay, and we should dig into, I think, Klay and Wiggins. I think it's a good way to go here at the top of this third hour. The question is, does Klay believe that this is what Klay is as a player right now? And can he accept that and with some relative consistency aim for games more like last night, as opposed, because it seems like games like last night a year ago would come after games like the opening night, where he would either be like, man, I wrecked the game, or somebody would maybe have to tell him, that he was a little bit overzealous with some of the shot selection on a night where he wasn't hot. Because I also think it relates back to some of the reporting on the contract extension. What type of player is he? Does Klay Thompson still believe 301 threes, 41.2% clip last year, even though it was up and down with wild mood swings of play over the course of the season? He still thinks he's the guy that should be paid for the totality of the numbers and not how those numbers impacted winning on a night-in, night-out basis. And so therein lies the rub as the Warriors try to sort how to get the most out of this team this season, but also how to figure out what to pay Klay Thompson for next season and in the future, because I just keep coming back to, if they're not close on money and they're not close on years, I mean, does that? There's only one way I take that, and I take that as, well, Klay thinks he's a 4-year, $160 million extension coming, and the Warriors are like, no, we really want it to be like 3 and 90, or maybe even slightly less than that, but we'll go up to 3 and 90 as kind of the high mark, or 3 and even 100 as the high mark. But 100 and 160 is a dramatic difference.
Yeah, and I think it's like, because not only the difference in the money, but also years. And I think that's where Klay, by no means is he trying to get greedy. I think he's thinking about what he's done and wants to be paid for his contribution to the dynasty. But the Warriors are at a point in their financial structure to where they can't necessarily afford to give Klay Thompson the years and the AAV and then watch him decline, because then that's going to kill them for the next 3 years. And so I think the disagreement is where Klay wants both years as well as the AAV, and the Warriors probably just want to give him either or. I mean, maybe there is a situation where the Warriors said, hey, like, if you want to make $40 million a year, we can't pay you more than 2 seasons. And of course, if you're Klay Thompson, you're looking at what Draymond just got as far as 4 years. Stephen Curry's going to be coming off the books a year before Draymond, or that player option comes up. And then you also have to wonder what's going to happen with Steve Kerr, even though he doesn't factor into the cap. Where's his future going to be? Ideally in Golden State. Ideally, all 4 of them are going to be at Golden State. But I think that's definitely weighing on the mind of Klay Thompson. One thing that was encouraging for me, though, about Klay specifically is that last season, and I think there was more of a driving mentality of, I got to prove that I'm back, as opposed to now playing for a contract, even though they're a little bit similar. That type of game for Klay Thompson last night didn't come really until the month of November. Like, I don't know how much self-awareness there was from Klay Thompson at the beginning of last season, to where he was taking a ton of shots, a lot of bad shots, particularly in the month of October. And so for him to already have kind of made maybe not a full switch, but to see it as early as the second game of the season, to me, is a positive sign.
Well, and I also think, Klay played pretty well aside from shooting the basketball in both games.
True.
Right?
True.
And last night, I think, 7 of 12 is fine, 2 of 4 from 3. That's more than acceptable with Steph doing what he was doing and the Warriors able to get the contributions they did from others. I thought, going back to Wiggins briefly, I thought the Warriors made a concerted effort to get Wiggins the ball early in the game. It tapered off as the game went on, but I think they made a point to get him engaged early, and he got a couple of buckets when the Warriors had a little bit of control in those first 6-7 minutes before the bench came in and the game kind of flipped there. So I think that's kind of a night-in, night-out basis as a side on Wiggins. But as far as Klay, I am a little more optimistic on Klay based on the fact that, he was pretty good defensively against Kevin Durant, and I thought he held his own last night in his matchups. And, yeah, the self-awareness is key. I mean, we talked all offseason, and he talked all offseason about how he cleared his head and he's in a different place. And all right, I'll give you the benefit of the doubt, but you got to show it by being a different person now that the season has started and playing differently than you did a year ago. So I'm kind of so far so good, but we're also, I think, very much in the same category as last year, where You have the one game where it's just steady and efficient, nothing spectacular. That's good enough to win. You have the bad shooting game, even though he does everything, other things well, and that still gets you beat. And so I think there is this fine line of finding the right balance for Klay and Wiggins as things move forward that ultimately is going to be the determining factor in how good or great this team can be, aside from all of the bench guys and young guys and role guys.
Yeah, and I think, Jay, you made an important distinction when we're talking about evaluating Klay, Wiggins, but also the rest of the non-Stephen Curry Warriors, quite frankly, because there is not as much room for error, margin for error when it comes to winning these games as there has been in years past, because there isn't as much talent as there is. There's sometimes a lack of athleticism because they've gotten a little bit older. There's a lack of size. There are areas in which the Warriors are deficient, so that does demand a Klay Thompson and Andrew Wiggins to not just have a good offensive night, or if they're not, it doesn't mean that you can just take a playoff down on defense, that you can't crash the boards and try to impact the rebounding, that you can't try and stick a hand in a passing lane and affect the game outside of just your shot. And I think Klay Thompson individually has, at times, and mainly last year, fallen into, well, if my shot's not going, then I'm just going to try and shoot myself out of it. Whereas last night, and even in game one, to your point, we saw him be able to provide a positive and productive impact on the basketball game without shooting the ball, or not just shooting the ball. And I think that's where Wiggins can also take a step. And that's where, quite frankly, we've also asked a guy like Jonathan Kuminga and Moses Moody to impact games. If you don't have it going offensively, if you can't make a shot, it doesn't mean that the rest of the game is just not for you. It just means it might not be your night. And so you're going to have to look around and find other ways to impact the basketball game. So that's something I definitely need to take note of, and I think fans do as well.
All right, let's get back to the phones. 888-957-9570, 888-957-9570. Suzette in Oakland next here on Warriors This Week on 95.7 The Game. Hey, Suzette.
Good morning. Nice to talk to both of you today. Evan pretty much covered what I was going to say. My concern is the points in the paint last night and also the rebounding. I know that Draymond didn't play, but I think that's going to be a clear emphasis again this year because they tried to shoot themselves out of a lot of games last year, chucking up a lot of threes. Hopefully they can improve on that when the ball's not falling. And also, I think it's going to change because I noticed last night, but then they moved the camera when Kuminga was walking off the court. I don't know if you noticed it. He was just shaking his head, and he went to go sit down, and he was getting ready to sulk. And then Kenny Atkinson walked over there and said, "Come on, get on up." And I wanted to see how that was going to transpire, but, they moved the camera. So I think they're looking to stop that because a lot of that was going on last season. So I'm looking, to be positive and, hopefully everything will be healthy and go from there. But it's nice talking to you guys. And Evan, if you're the same Evan that did the Panthers, I really enjoyed listening to you this season too as well.
Oh, thanks, Suzette. Yes, it is. I appreciate that.
Yeah, that is the one and only Evan Giddings. And thank you for the call, Suzette. Look, I think Kuminga is someone that they really – I don't want to put it on Jordan Poole, but the reality is I think with Jordan Poole, part of the benefit of taking him out of the equation was the fact that some of the younger players, I think Kuminga in particular, you'll talk to people who will say that Kuminga was maybe looking at the way Jordan Poole was doing things as a younger player that had thrived and hey, that's the way I need to go. Mm-hmm. And almost Jordan Poole is a guy that's been in it a couple years more than me. I'm gonna he basically taken after him as a younger player in terms of attitude and the like. And I think the Warriors are more optimistic about their ability to be able to coach Kuminga through and Kuminga's ability to accept the coaching with Jordan Poole no longer in the equation.
Yeah, and I think that there was a signal, whether it was intentional or not, the fact that Andrew Wiggins got less per year than Jordan Poole signaled to Jonathan Kuminga that, to your point, JD, that's the way you're going to get paid, and that's the way you're going to make a lot of money, is to score a lot of points, is to become the firecracker off the bench, and that's just not what the team needed from Jonathan Kuminga last year. I think they might need more of that this season, because I do wonder sometimes where the offense is going to come from. I mean, whether you are a fan of Jordan Poole or not, you do have to replace an 82-game player that scored north of 20 points per game. However, the percentage is however he got it. But the fact remains there are points that need to be scored. I think Kuminga can help in that aspect, along with the rest of that bench that to me is more, maybe a little more buttoned up than last year, J.K. included, Moses included. And so now, with a lot more minutes to go around, how is a guy like Jonathan Kuminga going to make Steve Kerr have to play him? Like, that's, I think, where we're at in Jonathan Kuminga's growth is maybe, I don't think Steve Kerr didn't want to play him last year, but he was looking for a reason to, and for whatever reason, J.K. did not give him enough of what he was looking for. So far this season, these first two games, I think Jonathan Kuminga, and especially Moses Moody, have put Steve Kerr on notice that they need to play, that they are demanding to play, because they're going to be an instrumental part of this season. Two of the few players that can grow, can get significantly better throughout 82 games in the regular season. And if this is where they're starting, I can't wait to see where they're going to progress to throughout this year.
You know, not to get all wonky on the contracts, but I've heard a few people mention it just in casual conversation. Kuminga is going to be due for an extension next year.
Yeah.
And I'm just looking at, he's making 7.6 or 6.0 this year. Team option next year obviously gets picked up 7.6. I think they already picked that up a couple, a while back. No brainer. 7.6 for next year. And then I wonder about Kuminga, because aside from him, I think they're in a tricky spot, because aside from him exploding and showing everyone that he is, got the potential to be a future star, I don't think they're going to be able to agree to an extension with Kuminga, because somebody said to me, well, he's probably going to be in line for $480, and I'm thinking, not the way he's played to this point in his career, that's the kind of deal. And I think you have to go back to Jordan Poole. Think of and two completely different players, but look at what Jordan Poole did 2 years ago at the beginning of the season, because that's when Jordan Poole vaulted himself into, he was going to be at least a 480. I remember 480 around this time 2 years ago, about a month later, but in November, as he really got off to a good start and the Warriors got off to the hot start, 480 was like, oh, 480, oh my God, that's a lot. He ended up obviously being worth a lot more than that as the season went on, and he helped them win that championship. But I think you need to start looking at the impact that Jordan Poole had on this team 2 years ago. That's what 480 looks like. Not so. And again, I'm not doing this to put. I just think it's really tricky, because, I wouldn't be in the business. I got to think Kuminga thinks he's worth a lot, and I got to think the Warriors are like, well, you haven't proven that yet, but we would like to keep you. So it almost is. I think the path right now, aside from him just exploding in a good way to where by the end of this season, it's like, oh yeah, that guy is awesome and a keeper and going to be real, maybe an all-star in the future. Aside from that, I feel like the course with Kuminga is play out next year, make him the qualifying offer, and see what the market dictates that he would get, and then you match him as a restricted free agent. I think that, again, I know I'm going way down the line, but I don't think – I wouldn't be inclined to do an extension, I think, with Jonathan Kuminga if he just continues to be kind of the player – even the player that he's been these first two games isn't going to be enough to be 480 or, 400 or something like that. So
yeah, you'd think not. It's interesting, though, because, look, I'm sure Jonathan Kuminga, and it's a different situation, but he just saw Jaden McDaniels get 5 years, $135 million, and that's his first rookie extension. I don't think Kuminga Like, I mean, McDaniels
McDaniels a much better player.
Exactly. But if Kuminga takes the kind of step this season that I'm sure he wants to, then I don't know if it would reach that category at all, but he might say, well, actually, you guys kind of want to pay me like Josh Green, who just got 3 for 40. I think I'm a lot closer to Jaden McDaniels. And even though it might be down the line, I don't think it's out of line to think about how the Warriors are going to handle that, because right now, and we kind of touched on it in the first hour, it's like they're playing this year to year. Klay Thompson doesn't have an extension. Steve Kerr doesn't have an extension. So for them to look at Jonathan Kuminga and say, well, actually, that's the guy we're going to have to lock up after this season, to me, he kind of gets put on the back burner based on the other contracts that they're going to have to work around.
Yeah, I mean, I look at Kuminga right now as somebody that's making 6 and goes up to 7.6 next year. And I mean, I look at Kuminga as more right now, and I'm going to say continuing on the same path that he's had, let's say, the first couple of games, which I think has been better than the path even from last year. I mean, to me, right this second, he's more of like a 4 and 60, kind of a deal. Like he would go from, let's say, 6 to 7.5 up to maybe 15. Like some may say that's even, a little hot, but that's also affording for maybe he continues to get a little bit better, but doesn't just explode. Aside from him exploding, I think it's more in the 4 and 60 type range, 4 and 70 type range for that first deal, as opposed to something that's really going to blow it up. But I guess my point is the Warriors can let the market dictate. I don't think he would take 4 and 60. Number one,
I agree. Yeah.
If the Warriors offer that right now, I don't think he would take that. I don't think he would take 4 and 70, to be honest, right now, if the Warriors offered that. But I also don't think you're not at this stage going to be, and look, we're getting ahead of ourselves, admittedly, but you're not at this stage going to be looking at doing, a 9-figure kind of a contract.
Yeah, and I also think you kind of have to think about how the Kuminga figures or value, whether it's in a year or in 2 years or throughout this season. Like, how does his value, it's tied in a way also, I think, to what Moses Moody does, because they're in the same draft class. You're probably going to want to keep both of them. So whatever the figure is for one is going to impact the other. And I think that becomes a little bit delicate, because so far we've seen a bit more immediate impact and production from a guy like Moses Moody, but Jonathan Kuminga is clearly the one with a higher ceiling. And you're hoping that this third year is a leap for both of them that catapults Jonathan Kuminga into a position where he can help you in a postseason series. And Moses Moody, who's already shown flashes of being able to help you in the postseason, can now play more significant minutes in a playoff scenario. And that, of course, is all after the regular season. That's going to be figured out. But I think we're going to learn quickly just how big of a leap not only a player like Jonathan Kuminga has made this offseason, but how much Steve Kerr trusts him will also kind of give us a little bit of insight as to what potentially his monetary figure could look like. So, yeah, I think it's going to be interesting for sure.
All right, 888-957-9570, Warrior Realist. We'll get to you on the other side as we've got one final segment. A couple of phone lines open, 888-957-9570. Comcast Business text line as well. John Dickinson, Evan Giddings, Warriors this week, 95.7 The Game.
Black Friday is coming, and that's the smart time to shop for a top-rated TV from Samsung, LG, or Sony. But why wait? You can get those Black Friday TV deals right now at Video Only. And then enjoy Thanksgiving with your new TV.
Tim Roy on the call at 4. So look for Evan right around 6, probably right around 6:45, 7 o'clock, taking your phone calls and providing analysis following game number 3. I'm going to have 49ers duty tomorrow at Levi's, and then I'll be back on Monday for the Warriors and the Pelicans with Warriors wrap-up. I think Willard and Dibbs are going to have Warriors Live for the earlier start on Monday, and then I'll have Warriors wrap-up back on Monday. So appreciate you being in today. Hope we get an opportunity to do a bunch of these this season, if not the bulk of them this season. That's been a lot of fun. And enjoy Warriors Live and Warriors Wrap-Up tomorrow, my friend.
Yeah, appreciate that. Look, I'm getting to sit in for you. You did a fantastic job on both the pre and the post. And like you mentioned, JD, 3 o'clock, Warriors Live, and then Warriors Wrap-Up after the game. Hopefully they wrap it up with a victory against a very beatable team in Houston, and they can kind of keep the road momentum moving. But, I know you got a big 49ers game to cover. Now we know that Brock Purdy's going to be back for it, so there should be a lot of juice around that game and for a team that's looking to stop a 2-game skid. So there's a lot going on this weekend. Happy to be sitting in for you, and I'm happy that we got a lot of good coverage. We got a lot of juicy storylines for both, of course, the 49ers, but primarily the Warriors, and I'm also looking forward to hopefully chopping it up about that all season long on Warriors this week.
Yeah, and look, the Warriors, I think, that's why last night was huge. It just kind of gets everything on track, and now, we'll see. I mean, I don't think any game is a sure thing, definitely in the NBA, but the Rockets have not looked good in their first couple of games this season, and then we'll see how the Warriors handle the back-to-back in New Orleans and all of that. Let's get back to the phones, 888-957-9570. Warriors Realist is up next here on 95.7 The Game. What's going on, Warriors Realist?
What's going on, brother? I think there's two huge keys that are going to get us to the promised land if, everyone stays healthy. Obviously, health is first and foremost. But the first thing is I like our depth across the board. We have a good mix of young and old people in those positions. Would I like a 7-2? Kuminga or TJD or something like that. Yeah, obviously they always talk about we are undersized, but I think we have the right pieces. But first and foremost, I think the most important part is the Chris Paul ad. It pains me to say, obviously, as a Warriors fan, but now that he's, obviously one of us, I think he is like multifaceted when it comes to the impact that he's going to have. I think second unit, turnovers, closing lineup, and then first and foremost, I think the actual rotation and the people that are going to play, I think he's going to have a huge impact. I love Kerr to death, but I think one of the things is not playing a Kuminga and a Moody last year. I don't think Chris Paul would allow that along with Steph and Dre. I think that's one thing that he's given me. And then probably the most important one that I've heard you guys kind of talking about today is Klay. I think Klay not having the ball in his hand, and then, CP3 running that finishing game and distribution so he can catch and shoot. I think he's going to be able to keep Klay in a good enough position in that 20 range without having to put the ball on the floor, because he's going to identify those things and see things that I think sometimes, Kerr will kind of just allow, but if he allows CP3 to do his thing and dictate and be that court general, I think he's gonna unlock a lot of things for us across the board with youngsters and keeping Klay, happy and getting the ball and catch and shoot and running plays for him versus having him try to dribble and make decisions and make plays, which we know he's not the greatest at doing. So I'm feeling actually pretty optimistic. I know you guys got to fill, a bunch of hours with a lot of the hypotheticals, but yeah, I trust Joe Lacob. I think he's gonna spend the money necessary when it comes to Klay and Kuminga, and he's not gonna allow them to break up the band. Like I know there's a lot of speculation, but that's just my take.
Appreciate the call. I think the Warriors want to keep Klay Thompson without a doubt. It's just a matter of if Klay really thinks he's a $40+ million player still. And then I think it's gonna, and he's adamant about that, and he's gonna stick to that, and he thinks another team would potentially pay him that. Then I think it could continue to get a little bit dicey. Now, if he comes down into the 30 into the 30s and maybe into the low to mid 30s, then I think maybe there's some action there to where he would get, a bigger deal in terms of at least the AAV compared to what Draymond got and obviously what Andrew Wiggins got, which I think is probably something that's going to be important to him. But as far as Chris Paul, I mean, to me, it's watching this. You can see all the different ways Chris Paul helps the Warriors in these first 2 games. And he hadn't been great in both games either, but you can see it.
Yeah, when he starts shooting the ball, it's going to be, I think it's going to add a different dimension to this team. And one thing that kind of got my brain rattling listening to that call is I do think Chris Paul also affects a guy like Klay Thompson, not necessarily in, Klay's going to shoot when he wants to shoot. That's just who he is. But I do think Chris Paul, as that floor general the caller was talking about, can have some effect on the secondary and third scores beyond Curry, because Curry's going to be able to do whatever he wants. He's going to shoot it. He's going to score points. He's going to ball out like he did last night against Sacramento. But if Klay Thompson doesn't need to be the second scorer on this team every single night. And I think someone like Chris Paul, with a great pulse and understanding of the flow of individual games, is going to be the guy that can kind of correct some of those impulsive decisions by not just only Klay Thompson, but other players on the Warriors as well, to understand where the ball needs to go, what needs to happen on a certain possession offensively, and then just be the guy to sort of calm things down. So I think Chris Paul has fit in seamlessly. And I think throughout the season, we're also going to see him impact a guy like Klay Thompson, not necessarily taking the ball out of his hands, but within the flow of the offense, understanding when and where to hit Klay Thompson to put him in more advantageous positions.
Back to the phones we go. Magic in Dallas next here on Warriors This Week. Hey, Magic.
Hey, what's going on, fellas? I just wanted to call in to always support my guy E, but I also I was a staunchly against the Warriors getting Chris Paul. I hated it. I thought they were going to trade him right away. But I can't lie. After watching these first 2 games, I think he's really going to help the team, not only with just helping out the second unit and empowering Kuminga and Moody and getting Klay open shots, but his ability to be the floor general outside of Steph is really, really going to help, especially that second unit. And this might be the first year in Steph's career where that second unit isn't like a minus however 100, for the season when he comes out. And I'm not a Niners fan, but it must be similar to how they felt when they got Richard Sherman from Seattle, because he was a hated person, and then all of a sudden he's on the team and he helps you get to, they didn't win a championship, but he helps you get there at least. So it reminds me of that a little bit. So what are you guys' thoughts?
Yeah, I think Warrior fans are getting more and more comfortable with it by the game. I think he said the right things. I think Chris Paul said all the right things about Steph and Klay and Draymond. I think Steph and Klay and Draymond have said all the right things about Chris. I was actually far less worried about it from a team standpoint. I love the move from a basketball standpoint immediately. I love the financial flexibility that it also gives the Warriors secondarily. But to me, it was more of a fan thing than it was going to be a player thing. I think fans get caught, Evan, in, well, Steph hates Chris and Klay hates this guy, and the reality is Steph Curry, Klay Thompson, and Draymond Green, and Warrior fans may cringe a little bit when I say this, but they know that Chris Paul is every bit the caliber of player on the same level as them. They absolutely know it, and sure, maybe Steph's above Chris and all that, but those guys don't think about it the way that the fans think about that kind of stuff. They respect the hell out of Chris Paul as a basketball player and a future Hall of Famer and somebody that's been on the top tier of players throughout the course of his entire career.
Look, I'm 100% with you. And first of all, shout out to Magic. Appreciate the love. And I think where he's coming from with Chris Paul is where a lot of fans were of remembering the guy that would do all the things that Chris Paul's the classic player that you hate playing against and you love having on your team. And that's why I have always tried to appreciate Chris Paul's game as much as I can, because he's also won wherever he's been. And to me, Chris Paul amplifies the best in a certain team. He's able to extract the best out of either a young player, which it appears and sounds like he's kind of taken, whether it's Kuminga or Moody, trying to mentor them. I think Anthony Slater was talking about this after the Kings game, speaking with Chris Paul, that Chris Paul went and called Shai Gilgeous-Alexander after their big win for OKC because he had Shai when he was a rookie or when he was a very young player, and he maintains those kind of relationships. All of those things are within the scope of the NBA. Everyone has respect for each other, I believe, as long as you are the caliber of player that we believe Chris Paul to be, which is a first ballot Hall of Famer. And that's also kind of funny. We were talking about the idea of this rivalry between the Kings and the Warriors. I think that's also why it's hard for me to see it as a rivalry, because I know that De'Aaron Fox has the utmost respect for Stephen Curry, outside of maybe Draymond Green, and Sabonis or Harrison Barnes and Draymond, whatever. Everyone on that opposite sideline respects the Warriors and vice versa. I believe enough that there's not bad blood. I don't think there was ever any bad blood between the players of Golden State and Chris Paul. I think there might have been some hesitancy of figuring out how he was going to work on the court. But to me, Chris Paul has had enough of a sample size of immersing himself with any given situation and turning it into a relatively successful one that I believe that he could help the Warriors, even if, for example, he hasn't hit a three-pointer in his first 2 games. It's that kind of fit that he's demonstrated himself to have wherever he's been. And so I'm glad that that has not kind of spun on its head. Maybe I guess the attitude that he showed in his first official press conference kind of gave people some pause. But to me, JD, that is a sign of a bulldog and a competitor, and quite frankly, a type of attitude that I think could help the Warriors, not hurt them.
I think all sides in this thing are doing everything they possibly can to make it work. And I think so far it appears as if it has a great chance to work. And then we'll see what happens from there. Even to the point where there's now reports that Chris Paul would be okay coming off the bench and that it's trending in that direction. And so, look, nobody knew exactly how it was going to work out. But, again, I keep coming back to the fact that I thought it was a little overblown, the notion that these guys all kind of hate each other. Like I think a lot of that is the fans do, and I get that. I mean, I totally understand why it would be a little weird or uncomfortable given the Steph CP3 rivalry and how beloved Steph is obviously in the Bay Area. But I mean, those two worked out together and were friends early on in Steph's career. And I think it did get a little icy there for a time when Steph was emerging and eventually becoming a better player than Chris, after Chris was the better player probably for the first 5 years of Curry's career, and then Curry surpassed him in that 14-15 season and really has been the better player since. So I think, sure, maybe there's a little iciness because of that and the fact that Steph has gone on to win the 4 championships and Chris Paul hasn't. But I think all of that got wiped away. And really it comes back to Steph Curry, I think, being the person that he is to be so. I mean, he welcomed Kevin Durant. He's welcomed Chris Paul. And it's, again, all you can ask is that it gives this an opportunity to work. And I think the Warriors, it still may not from a basketball standpoint or from an age standpoint, but they're giving themselves the best possible chance.
No, and I think Curry understands the bottom line, which is you got to win. And Chris Paul, if he helps you win, is going to be a valuable member of this team. And he's helped teams win in the past. I know he hasn't done it at a championship level, but I think he has been identified by the rest, kind of the inner core, the big three, as a guy that can help them get back to the mountaintop. And unless, JD, they start to lose, I don't think we're going to be talking about Chris Paul as a problem throughout this season. Winning cures everything, and I think the Warriors, with what happened last season, understood that all of the kind of minor issues, of course, beginning preseason, but then every single time there was an absence or Wiggins or Poole or kind of the murmurs that would leak out of the locker room, every time you don't win a basketball game, that noise begins to get louder. And so this year, if they do get off to a hot start, if they do stack W's, I think a lot of the concerns, not only just around Chris Paul, but around some of the residue from last season that people are wondering if it was going to leak over, that stuff will get calmed. And to me, that's very important for this team, not only, of course, to play ahead, to potentially offset some injuries or absences, but also to get themselves into the right mindset back to what they were when they won the championship 2 years ago, as opposed to what they were last year.
All right, let's get Junior in Pacifica in here before we call it a morning on Warriors this week. Hey, Junior, you're on 95.7 The Game.
Hey, gentlemen, thank you. I was, like a lot of Warriors fans, really skeptical about Chris Paul coming in. I'm starting to see some of those little things he does for the other players. And someone who can help Klay Thompson and the young guys all look better. He's not a seamless fit because we got to change how we play with him on the floor. You know, it changes what the Warriors, how they show up. And it's fascinating to watch. I think part of the effect on last year is it's just something new. I mean, it's such a change in the Warriors. You got to focus on the present. You're too busy doing that to look at the future. And finally, Evan, you're sounding like a seasoned pro here. Good work. Good to hear you on the radio.
Appreciate it. Thanks, Junior.
Appreciate it, Junior. Thanks for the call. Look, it does change the way the Warriors play a little bit. I think they needed that change. I think they needed a dose of control and just calm and a little. They need to be a little more buttoned up. I think they aren't talented enough at this stage with the older players a little bit on the downturn and trying to mix everybody in. They're not talented enough to play the way that they played in 2015, 16, 18, 19. They just aren't. They can't play as recklessly, and I think Chris Paul enables them in a lot of ways to play less recklessly, and they're better for it.
Yeah, and look, I mean, naturally, the amount of passes are going to decrease. You know, last season, I think they were close to 330, 340 per game, just total passes. Through the first two games, they've been in the 250 range. I think that is a Chris Paul impacted stat. But that doesn't necessarily mean they're not playing Warriors basketball. And so I think as we continue in the season, we'll see the Warriors come to Chris Paul a little bit. They'll meet him halfway, and hopefully Chris Paul will also meet them halfway. I think offensively is where I am wondering where he's going to fit in as far as scoring the basketball. I have no issue, and I believe he's going to be able to set people up. I think he's going to be able to slow the offense down. But when the Warriors were successful throughout their dynasty, but also even last season, is when they could push the pace when they wanted to. Not against a team like Sacramento who can get up and down, but against a slower unit. How are they going to mix and match their styles? And how is Chris Paul going to mix and match his style, which has traditionally been pick and roll, pound the rock, find an open shot, or take an 18-footer? How is that going to kind of, coincide with what the Warriors have been and what has really made them successful? I think that's something I'm going to be paying attention to, not only throughout the season, but of course tomorrow and on Sunday against the Rockets.
Yeah, this thing's starting to take shape, and another opportunity for the Warriors to continue some of the momentum they built last night tomorrow against the Rockets. That'll do it for us. Evan, great stuff, my man, as always. Really appreciate the chance to get to work with you, and enjoy Warriors Live and Warriors Wrap-Up tomorrow for the Rockets game, and hopefully we'll do this again soon, my man.
Yeah, I hope so. Look, 3 hours flew, and appreciate everyone tuning in for the first edition this season, both on YouTube as well as listening on the radio. I appreciate you letting me sit in for you tomorrow, JD, and hopefully the Niners can pull out a W for you.
All right, for Evan Giddings and Craig Valentino in our San Francisco studios, I'm John Dickinson. Appreciate you listening. Back next week, 9 a.m. until noon, right here. Warriors This Week on 95.7 The Game.
When my daughter gets a cold, I have a secret weapon. DayQuil Kids Berry from Vicks. DayQuil Kids is specially formulated to treat kids' most bothersome cold and cough symptoms quickly. And the best part is that DayQuil Kids Berry tastes really great. Aren't you supposed to be resting? Maybe.
DayQuil Kids Berry. The kids' berrylicious daytime congestion, coughing, stuffy head, stuffy nose, just for kids medicine. Safe for kids 6 years plus.
Heart failure, carpal tunnel syndrome, shortness of breath, stomach issues, lower back pain. How does it all add up? If you have heart failure and any of those seemingly unrelated symptoms sound familiar, It's time to talk with your cardiologist and get the full picture. They may add up to transthyretin amyloid cardiomyopathy. ATTR-CM is a rare and underdiagnosed disease. Recognize the signs and discuss them with your doctor soon. Learn more at connectwithyourheart.com. That's connectwithyourheart.com. Sponsored by Pfizer.
So, how's your research going?
Surprising! After I figured out the top-rated TVs in our price range, I went shopping for deals.
And who's the best?
It wasn't the internet, and it wasn't the warehouse club.
But?
It was video only. They had better deals on the Samsung, LG, and the Sony TVs that got the highest scores.
Better than online and at the club?
I know! Video only beat them all. And now we can afford an even better model for the same price. My research really paid off.
If we buy it video only.
Exactly. Otherwise, we'll be sorry.
At Video Only, you won't find huge stores with refrigerators or microwaves, but you will find the best deals on top-rated TVs, soundbars, and monitors. Shop around. Just make sure you visit Video Only, because if you don't,
you'll be sorry.
In Mountain View, San Mateo, Union City, Dublin, and San Rafael. Video